joining us today from Alabama. This is Lisa Silver. She is, I was just seeing her, and that's wonderful. Lisa's joining us, and the violinist on From a Radio Engine to the Photon Wing. Lisa,
Hello.
so good to see you. Hello.
Good to see you too.
Thank you for being with us here today. What a delight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, please share with us how the circuitous journey you took from well, now you're in Alabama, but there's a many years in Nashville, and there was a foray with you were given an offer to potentially record for Countryside with Michael Nesmith. But take us up to that initial offer from Mike. How give us a little précis of the Lisa Silver story up to then.
Well, I grew up in Detroit, and I started playing classical violin when I was about 8. And but I also was interested in all kinds of music, and of course I was a big Monkees fan, Beatles fan when I was. They came along right at the right time. I was about 12 when the Beatles came out, and maybe 13 or 14 when the Monkees came out. So loved all that, and played in little bands when I was in high school. So I loved the violin, but I also loved other things as well. And I went to the University of Michigan School thinking that I was going to be a classical violin major. And even though I loved the classical violin, I sort of fell out of love with the music school because I wanted to do other things as well. Ended up joining a country band. And we moved, this was in Ann Arbor. We moved to Nashville, not necessarily to be together as a band, but they were moving. The two of the guys were moving to Nashville, and I didn't have any particular reason to stay in Detroit or Ann Arbor. So I moved along with them. And one of them you may have heard of. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Riders in the Sky, but the bass player, Fred Labor, who goes by the name Too Slim, we all started out in this band together in Ann Arbor. We were called the Honky Tonk Angels. So they moved to Nashville. I decided to come along. And on the first trip, we were scouting it out. This was in the summer of 1972. We met a writer named Troy Seals, who was very well-known, well-respected Nashville writer at the time. And he called me up and encouraged me. He was one of the reasons really that I moved to Nashville. I had gone back home for a while, and he encouraged me to move down. He told me that there was a new division of Atlantic Records called Countryside, and I had forgotten that until you reminded me of that, Mark, that it was being started, and Mike Nesmith was going to be running it, and he thought I might be a good fit, so he invited me to come down, so I came down for a while, and my intention, well, initially I wanted to be Linda Ronstadt, because, what young woman didn't want to be Linda Ronstadt back then, so I wanted to be a recording artist, but I was also starting to get into studio work. And, I was listening while you were talking about the credits on the Moving In with Rico cut, and how detailed you get with looking at all these credits. And that's what I was doing back then. And one of the people who I had seen on a lot of records was a fiddle player named Buddy Spiker. And through a series of circumstances, I met him, and he took me under his wing as a fiddle player. So things were starting to happen. And when that potential thing for Countryside Records happened, I thought, well, I could take a big risk and move to California, but they weren't really offering me anything specific. Of course, I was flattered, and it was great to meet Mike Nesmith, and I thought that could be a great opportunity, but they didn't say, come on out, we're going to pay your expenses, we're going to give you a record deal. They just said, why don't you come out to California? I was like, I'm starting to get some work in Nashville versus taking a big leap and moving to California. And I was only like 20 or 21 at the time. And I thought, I'm going to stay in Nashville and see where this leads with the studio work. So that's what happened then. And, it could have been a really good opportunity. But as I recall, I don't think Countryside Records stayed in business all that long. So it may not have turned into.
Not without Lisa Silver on the label.
That might have been it.
Who knows, right? Okay, but so this is very cool. You say no to this kind of somewhat nebulous offer, but an offer from Mike Nesmith. I know a lot of our viewers are saying like, what? But the thing is, a few years later, in Nashville, Quadraphonic, this David Briggs studio there, Nesmith comes to town. He's not really a Nashville cat, right? He's coming in with getting David and yourself to come and play on this wonderful record. Fast forward, I mean, I know you've done tons of dates. Are you sitting in front of the Australian gold record for Rio, by the way?
No.
No? Okay.
On the road, but not that one.
Okay. But you are okay. So please tell us what I don't want to. You should take over here. Like what Photon Wing? How's that happen?
Kind of like what Eddie was saying when you asked him about when he wrote it, and he said, "Oh, I don't remember writing it." That's kind of the same thing about that particular recording session, because at the time I was really just hyper focused on working, and it wasn't a time where everybody walked around with a cell phone with a little convenient camera in it. So I didn't take a picture. I don't really have memento of that. I just know that I got called to work. And whether or not I knew it was a Mike Nesmith session before I got there, I really don't remember. And I it's funny because obviously when I heard the record again, I remembered that I had played the part, but I also think that I had sung on that song Rio, but I don't really think I have proof. But I think I remembered that, something about the background vocals. I think, because I also remembered at the very end when one of the singers said, Rio de Janeiro. And I remember thinking that was funny at the time, and I heard it again 50 something years later, and I still thought it was kind of funny. So I have more of a memory of that, unless I'm making it up, which I have found that I've done that some. I've thought I've sung on something and then found out that I didn't. But I know I played on it, and I think I sang on that.
Well, cool, because with Pebble Daniel and Marsha Rouse, you are credited elsewhere with those two singers, right?
Okay, and that would make sense, because that's my memory, was that it was Pebble and Marsha. They were popular singers at the time.
Okay. And Linda Hargrove, also the songwriter, has a background vocal credit on the record, but I noticed that you, Pebble, and Marsha had done some work that was credited together.
Yes, that kind of adds up. But in terms of how I got called for the session regarding playing, I had developed a little bit of a reputation as kind of an improvising violinist. I because of my classical chops growing up, I wasn't really a bluegrasser, but I could do sort of a hybrid style of kind of an improvised violin. And that's what they call me for. And I'm guessing that probably what they said was, just play whatever you think sounds cool. Because listening to the track again, it sounds like, especially at the end, that I just sort of noodled around, and they probably just used parts of what they like. And I might have even recorded several different tracks, and they might have just picked and chosen from what they liked and put it together. That's kind of what I'm guessing happened based on what I was hearing of what I played.
Cool. It's kind of maybe a composite take then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
It's a very transcendent part. This is Casablanca Moonlight. And for just for the technical question, at what point do you go in as a violinist and a fiddle player? Where's the line?
I think it just depends on the style of the song. If it was a really country song, I probably would have played something different.
Right.
But this one seemed to dictate a little more violin-y style, for lack of a more articulate word.
Interesting. Okay, so like The Other Room, the album closer, you're on there, and it's kind of more of your classic fiddle type kind of chops in between maybe a little more, and then Casablanca Moonlight is what, as you were saying.
Okay, what was the other song? Because I don't.
It's called The Other Room, and it's not the Carlos slammed his foot down far above the pavement. It's kind of like anyways, I think you are on there, but
pull that one up and listen to that as well. Because when you mentioned the one I listened to, but I didn't listen to that one. But it's funny, it's like Eddie was saying again, when you're really focused on working, you kind of do something and then you go on to the next thing, and you don't always remember it. And then some things I pull up years later and I go, oh yeah, now I remember that. And some things I just don't remember because I just was working, and then you go on to the next thing. It's different from being a live player where you're going to do the same thing over and over, sometimes for days, months, weeks, maybe years if you're lucky. With studio players, you go in there, you work for 3 hours, and if you're lucky, you're going on to something else for 3 hours. So whatever you just did is gone, and you're then absorbing the next thing, and then that's gone. So it's a different kind of focus. It's like really hyper focused for a short period of time, but it doesn't always necessarily stick in your brain once you're gone.
Right. Well, it's
So
definitely stuck in our brains and hearts over the years as listening to this track. And you do remember that the violin you're holding, I believe, is your Casablanca Moonlight Good Luck violin. Is that right?
it is my violin. I got this violin when I first went to college in 1969. I tried out a bunch of different violins, and this was the one that I really loved. And I've had it ever since. This has been my main recording violin. Maybe once or twice I've tried recording with something else, but this has always been the one that sounded good on tape. And yeah, this is the one that I've always had.
Wow. And you'd mentioned you were willing to give us a little sampling of the Casablanca Moonlight.
I'll give it a try. On Zoom,
Yeah, I know.
the quality on Zoom is not so great, but when I pull it up again and I studied it for a second, so I think I can play it. Want me to give it a try?
Absolutely. Okay. Lisa Silver, Casablanca Moonlight.
That's the part I remembered anyway.
Awesome. That's the signature part. That's so great. So wow. Well, what's next? What's next chapter here? You're in a new state.
Yeah, in a new state. So I lived in Nashville from 1972 to 2019. And then my husband, who his name is Clayton Ivy, he's a keyboard player, really well known in these parts. He lived in Muscle Shoals, Alabama for 25 years as part of the Muscle Shoals rhythm section. He moved up to Nashville, and we were married, and he lived in Nashville for 30 years. And we decided to move back down here because studio work had kind of slowed down for me. I was doing other things, and we fell in love with the water down here because Florence, Alabama, where we are, is right near Muscle Shoals, and it's on the water. So we decided to move back down here, and I've been kind of carving out a new life for myself. I spent 50 years as a studio, primarily vocalist, a violinist and fiddler, some, but then I got more into vocals. And over the past couple of years, I've been kind of making my way down here. I've been picking up the violin again. I've been playing for a lot of worship services around the city. And I'm teaching songwriting at Florence Academy of Fine Arts, the public high school in Florence. So, and people are starting to know me a little bit down here as a songwriter. So I think I'm going to start doing a few showcases and things like that. So I'm just carving out a new path in a new place, which is, interesting after living 50 years in one place. It's kind of a new and interesting challenge.
That's so cool.
Lisa, thank you for joining us so much. I think your contribution to Casablanca Moonlight really helped elevate that track. I did want to mention before we go, you had mentioned your mentor, I think Buddy
Spiker.
I did a quick Google search, and if that is to be believed, he also played on some Monkees records.
I would not be surprised at all.
In 1968, Mike Nesmith went to Nashville and did some sessions. A few of them are released, and they were released later as bonus cuts on later albums. But one in particular was called St. Matthew, which has actually had some legs over the years. It's kind of a fan favorite. So if you ever get a chance to
I will check it out. Yeah, Buddy was he still works some, I think, but he was particularly first call session player right back, back then. And that's how I became familiar with him, because he played on Linda Ronstadt album. It was one of my favorites. So I was thrilled to meet him. And yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all that he played on that.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so we're gonna again, thank you so much. We just got quickly before you wrap up here, Lisa. You say you do some of the songwriter symposium. So as you reflect on Casablanca Moonlight, and not just as a recording, but as a song, do you have any songwriting reflection on it?
It's a really unusual song. You know, it kind of tells an interesting little story, and I watched the video, and it was very, you know, colorful. They were dancing, and you know, it's just not what you would necessarily expect. It was kind of quirky. I think that whole album was, and I remember it got really good reviews when it came out, just because it was unusual. And of course, Mike Nesmith being a former Monkey, I think it was different from what people might have expected from him. But he was really respected as a writer. So, and I think that song is a good example of some eclectic and unusual writing. I was glad to be a part of it, and I was glad to be reminded of it all these years later. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. And finally, do you have a favorite Monkey?
Well, you know, I mean, as a young girl when the Monkeys came out, I'm sorry, Mike, but it had to be Davy.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Lisa Silver, thank you ever so much for being part
My
of the
pleasure.
fun. Okay, all the best.
You too.
Bye-bye.